So today in class we talked about solving systems of equations by using the elimination method. So for this example, it's one of the easier ones because one of your variables, either x or y, has to have the same coefficient, which is the number in front of the variable, but they have to have opposite signs. One of them has to be positive, one has to be negative. So for this first example, if we take a look at our y's, I have a negative 2y and a positive 2y, so those are going to be the ones that we're going to end up eliminating. So for step one, all you got to do is make sure that the variables are lined up. So the x's are lined up, your y's are lined up, and then the numbers at the end. So luckily, it was already lined up from the beginning, and because we have the same coefficient and opposite signs, we could skip step 2 and go to step 3. Okay? So if we take a look at step 3, all we have to do is add straight down in order to eliminate our y's because they have opposite signs and they have the same coefficient, which is the same number in front of the variable. So when I add 2x plus 2x, that's how I got 4x for step 3. When I add negative 8 plus 4, that's going to give me a negative 4. So now the last step that I have to do right now, 4 and x are multiplying, so the inverse of that, or the opposite of that, is divide by 4 on both sides. When I divide by 4 on both sides, negative 4 divided by 4 gives me a negative 1. So once you figure out what x is, you have to substitute that number or that value into one of the original equations for x. So at the top, I believe I chose the second equation, 2x plus 2y equals 4. So as you look out to the side here, it was 2x plus 2y equals 4. So all I did for step 4, instead of x, I substituted what x was, which is negative 1 plus 2y equals 4. So from there, as you can see, I multiplied 2 times negative 1 to get negative 2, brought down the 2y equals, and then brought down the 4. From there, in order to get y by itself, I need to start off by adding 2 to both sides. So 4 plus 2 end up giving me 6 on the right side, and then these positive 2 and negative 2 cancel, leaving me with 2y on the left side. So now I have 2y equals 6. So in order to get y by itself, I divide by 2. When I do that, 6 divided by 2 is 3. So remember, with the solution, when you write it as an ordered pair, the x always comes first, and x was negative 1, which is why you see it first. And then my y value is 3, which is why it's second. Okay? So that was for example 1. If we take a look at example 2, okay, 4x plus 3y equals 16. This is what was given to me. And then 2x minus 3y equals 8. Remember, we want to look to see which variable that we can eliminate because they have the same coefficient, the number in front of the variable, and opposite signs. So in this case, it's going to be my y values again. So step 1 is to make sure that my x's are all lined up, my y's, and the numbers after the equal sign are lined up, which they already are. Okay? Because I already have a positive 3y and a negative 3y, I can skip step 2 and go straight into step 3. Step 3 is just having them lined up and adding everything together, your like terms. So if I add straight down 4x plus 2x, that's where that 6x came from. When I do positive 3y minus, when I do positive 3y minus 3y, those cancel, leaving me with 6x equals, and then 16 plus 8 is 24. And then when I divide by 6 on both sides, 24 divided by 6 is 4, so that's where that came from. Okay? So then I have to take that x equals 4 and substitute it into one of the original equations. I substituted it into the second equation, which was 2x minus 3y equals 8. So because I know what x is, I'm going to substitute, instead of x, I'm going to substitute what x was, which is 4, minus 3y equals 8. So as you can see in step 4, that's pretty much what I did. And so I did 2 times 4 to give me 8. I brought down the minus 3y equals 8. And then in order to get the y by itself, I have to subtract by 8 on both sides first. And when I do 8 minus 8, it cancels right here. And then it also gives me 0 on the other side. So now I've got negative 3y equals 0. Right now, negative 3 is being multiplied by y, so the opposite of that would be division. So that's why I'm dividing by negative 3. Excuse me. So when I divide 0 by negative 3, I end up getting 0. And so now I have to write it as an ordered pair. Remember, x comes first. So my solution is 4, 0. So that's example 2. Okay. Example 3 is one of the ones where I'm going to have to do step 2 because I do have opposite signs for each of the variables, but I don't have the same coefficient. Okay. So when I look at this, it's going to be easier to cancel the x's because the number in front of the x in the first equation is 2, and the number in the second equation is a negative 4. Those numbers to me are smaller than the negative 3 and the positive 5 that are attached to the y. Okay, so step 1, I just made sure that they were all lined up. Okay, but here's how I teach step 2. So I'm trying to cancel out my x's. So what I know for step 2 is I have a 4 at the bottom. Okay, so if I have a 4 at the bottom, that is why I multiplied by 4 at the top. Okay? If it's at the bottom in front of the variable that you're trying to eliminate, you have to multiply by that at the top. Because I have a 2 at the top in front of the variable that I'm trying to eliminate, I'm going to multiply the bottom by that number. Okay? Because 4 times 2 is the same thing as saying 2 times 4. Because they already have opposite signs, I don't have to make one of them negative, so that's why both of them, one's a positive 4 and the other one's a positive 2, because I already have opposite signs. When you distribute this 4 to everything on the inside, you get a new equation. So 4 times 2x gave me that 8x. 4 times negative 3y gave me the negative 12y. 4 times 4 gave me 16, so that's where those numbers came from. I have to do the same thing to the bottom equation. So when I do 2 times negative 4x, that gives me negative 8x. When I do 2 times 5y, that gives me positive 10y. When I do 2 times negative 8, that's where that negative 16 came from. So that's what step 2 is. If you don't have the same coefficient and opposite signs, you have to get them to be the same number and have opposite signs. So now we can begin to do step 3, which is just line them up, and now we add straight down. Okay? When I add 8x plus negative 8x, that cancels. And when I do negative 12y plus 10y, that's how I got negative 2y. When I do 16 plus a negative 16, that gives me 0. They cancel out. So then I continue by dividing by negative 2 on both sides. And 0 divided by negative 2 is 0, which is why the y says y equals 0. Okay? So now I have to take that y equals 0 and substitute it into one of the 2 original equations. I chose the top equation that we started off with, which was 2x minus 3y equals 4. So all I'm going to do from there is substitute 0 in for y. So this is 2x minus 3. Y now is 0 equals 4. Well, we know anything times 0 is just 0, so that's why I brought down, as you can tell in step 4, I just brought down the 2x and brought down the equals 4. From there, all I have to do is divide by 2 on both sides to end up giving me x equals 2. So now I know x equals 2 and y equals 0. All I have to do is write it as an ordered pair, 2, 0. So that's for example 3. If we take a look at example 4, okay, same process. They give me this. This is what I was originally given. 5x plus 2y equals -8, and 4x plus 2y equals -16. I always tell the kids, figure out what you want to cancel from the beginning, your x's or your y's. I always like to cancel out the ones that have smaller numbers. So for my x's, I have a 5 and a 4, and for my y's, I have a 2 and an invisible 1 right here. So 2 and 1 are smaller numbers for me, so it's going to be easier to multiply to get rid of the y's rather than the x's. So that leads me to go into step 2, okay? Because I have a 1 at the bottom, I'm going to multiply the top by a -1. The reason why I'm multiplying by a negative is because the signs are the same for the y. I have a +2 and a +1. One of them has to be negative. So I just chose to multiply the top by a negative. You could multiply the bottom one by a negative and the top by a positive, but I just chose to do the top for this example. So because there's a 1 at the bottom, I multiply by a -1 at the top for my y. Because I have a 2 in front of the y at the top, I have to multiply by a 2 at the bottom. So all you're doing is what's on top, you multiply it by the bottom. What's on bottom in front of the variable you're trying to cancel, you multiply that at the top. Okay? So when I do that, I have to distribute this -1 to everything. So -1 times 5x gave me the -5x. -1 times 2y gave me -2y. -1 times -8 gave me the +8 that I got. Okay? Do the same thing for the bottom. When I do 2 times 4x, I get 8x. 2 times a +y gives me a +2y. And then 2 times a -16 gives me a -32. Now I know I have the same coefficient for my y's and opposite signs. So I can go ahead and do step 3, which is just add, line them up and add them together. So when I do -5x plus 8x, that's where I got a +3x. When I do 2y, -2y plus a +2y, that cancels. And then 8 plus a -32 gives me a -24. From there, all I have to do is divide by 3 on both sides to get x by itself. When I do that, that gives me x equals -8. From there, I substitute that value into one of the original equations. So I chose to do it for the bottom equation, which was 4x plus y equals -16. Okay? So all I did, instead of writing x, I substituted -8 into that plus y equals -16. And then I solved from there. So 4 times -8 is where I get that -32 from. I brought down the positive y and brought down the -16. Yeah. So this should, I wrote this wrong. This should actually say -16 right here. Okay? So then I add 32 to both sides. When I do that, add 32, -16 plus 32 gave me that 16, which when I write the solution, the x comes first, which is -8, and then the y, like I said, the order pair comes second, which is 16. So your x is -8 and your y is 16. So on Friday, the students will have a quiz over systems of equations and inequalities by graphing, substitution, and elimination. So we'll tell them, hey, solve this by